There exists a single deception woven so deeply into the fabric of human society that most people live their entire lives believing it to be sacred truth. This lie shapes how you present yourself to the world, determines the masks you wear in public, and dictates the silent agreements you make with those who hold power over your fate. Machiavelli understood this deception with crystalline clarity, and he knew that those who could see through it would possess a freedom so complete that no manipulation, no political game, no social pressure could ever truly touch them again. The moment you recognize this fundamental falsehood, something shifts inside you. A veil drops, and suddenly the invisible strings that once controlled your actions become painfully visible and therefore powerless. Consider for a moment how much of your daily existence revolves around appeasing others, maintaining appearances, and conforming to expectations that were never truly your own. You perform elaborate dances of politeness, suppress your authentic thoughts, and carefully calibrate your words to avoid offense, all while believing this performance is simply how civilized people must behave. But what if this entire theater of virtue, this constant performance of goodness and propriety, is precisely the trap that keeps you vulnerable? Machiavelli observed the courts of Renaissance Italy with the eyes of someone who had seen empires rise and fall, who had witnessed the brutal reality beneath the perfumed surface of power. And what he discovered was that those who insisted most loudly on their virtue were often those who wielded cruelty with the greatest effectiveness. The lie we speak of is this: that moral appearance and moral reality are the same thing, that the world rewards genuine goodness, and that those who proclaim the loudest adherence to virtue are necessarily the most trustworthy. Society teaches you from childhood that if you are simply good enough, honest enough, and virtuous enough, you will be protected and rewarded. Yet Machiavelli saw what happens to the truly virtuous in a world governed by those who merely perform virtue. They are used, exploited, and discarded the moment their usefulness expires. He recognized that power does not flow to the most genuinely moral, but to those who understand how to appear moral while acting with ruthless pragmatism when circumstances demand it. This revelation is not a call to abandon ethics or embrace mindless cruelty, as Machiavelli's critics have suggested for centuries. Rather, it is an invitation to understand the true nature of power dynamics and human interaction, to see the game being played around you with perfect clarity so that you are never again a pawn in someone else's strategy. When you understand that the world operates on interests rather than ideals, that people are motivated far more by what benefits them than by abstract principles, you gain a perspective that makes you almost impossible to manipulate. You begin to see through the performances others stage, recognize when someone's proclaimed virtue is merely a costume they wear to achieve their goals, and most importantly, you stop sabotaging yourself by clinging to naive beliefs about how the world should work instead of accepting how it actually does work. What follows is not comfortable knowledge, nor is it the kind of wisdom that will make you popular at dinner parties or earn you praise from those who profit from your innocence. But for those who choose to see clearly, who prefer harsh truth over comforting delusion, Machiavelli offers something far more valuable than popularity. He offers you sovereignty over your own life, immunity from the manipulations that ensnare those who refuse to acknowledge the darker currents of human nature, and the freedom that comes only to those brave enough to stare unflinchingly at reality and accept what they find there. The question is whether you possess the courage to abandon the lie you have been taught to cherish and embrace the uncomfortable truth that will set you free. In every society throughout history, there has existed a fundamental separation between what people claim to value and what they actually reward with power, wealth, and influence. Machiavelli observed this distinction with the precision of a surgeon examining a living body, noting that while everyone professes devotion to honesty, generosity, and compassion, those who rise to positions of genuine authority rarely practice these virtues with the purity they preach. This is not because the world is filled with hypocrites, though certainly it is, but because survival in the arena of power requires a flexibility that rigid adherence to virtue cannot provide. The prince, who is generous to a fault, will soon find his treasury empty and his position vulnerable, while the prince who appears generous through calculated acts of strategic kindness maintains both his resources and his reputation. The performance becomes everything because human beings do not judge you primarily by your intentions or your private character, but by the image you successfully project into the world. A leader may harbor the kindest heart and the most genuine concern for his people, yet if he appears weak, indecisive, or easily manipulated, he will be overthrown by someone who possesses none of his virtue but all of his cunning. Conversely, a ruler who understands the necessity of appearing merciful while being prepared to act with severity when circumstances demand will maintain order and respect far more effectively than the genuinely merciful leader who cannot bring himself to punish wrongdoing decisively. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand how the perception of strength often matters more than strength itself, how the image of wisdom can achieve more than wisdom unaccompanied by savvy presentation. This is the first uncomfortable truth that most people resist acknowledging. The world you live in rewards effective performance more reliably than it rewards authentic virtue. You may work with someone who speaks constantly about integrity while engaging in subtle betrayals, yet because they have mastered the language of virtue, they advance while more genuinely ethical colleagues remain unrecognized. The person who understands this dynamic does not necessarily become unethical themselves, but they stop expecting the universe to reward them simply for being good in private. They learn that virtue without strategic awareness is vulnerability dressed up as morality, that goodness unexpressed or poorly communicated is indistinguishable from weakness in the eyes of those who measure others by their usefulness. Machiavelli's insight cuts even deeper when we consider how this performance shapes not just individual advancement, but the entire structure of social power. Those who control institutions and organizations maintain their authority not primarily through superior ethics, but through superior understanding of how to appear indispensable, how to position themselves as the solution to problems they may have subtly created, how to speak the language that makes others believe in their legitimacy. The lie is that these positions of power are occupied by the most deserving, the most virtuous, the most genuinely capable. The truth is that they are occupied by those who best understand the gap between perception and reality and know how to exploit it without appearing to do so. When you internalize this understanding, you stop wasting energy being outraged at hypocrisy and start developing the discernment to recognize it. You notice when someone's proclaimed values conveniently shift to match their current interests, when acts of apparent kindness serve strategic purposes, when declarations of principle function primarily as social camouflage. This awareness does not make you cynical. Cynicism is just another form of naive thinking that assumes everyone is equally corrupt. Rather, it makes you realistic, capable of appreciating genuine virtue when you encounter it while remaining undeceived by its skillful imitation. You become someone who can navigate the world as it is, rather than as you wish it were. The performance of virtue is not inherently evil, and Machiavelli never suggested abandoning ethics entirely. What he recognized was that in a world where some people perform virtue while acting purely from self-interest, those who insist on being transparently virtuous in all circumstances place themselves at a systematic disadvantage. The solution is not to become ruthlessly self-interested yourself, but to develop the sophistication to appear virtuous when it serves your legitimate purposes, while retaining the flexibility to act pragmatically when virtue alone proves insufficient. This is the balance that creates not corruption, but effectiveness. Not moral decay, but survival with dignity in a world that often mistakes kindness for weakness. Understanding the performance of virtue transforms how you engage with power structures, workplace dynamics, and even personal relationships. You stop broadcasting your good intentions as if they should automatically earn trust, and you start demonstrating your value through actions that others can recognize and appreciate. You cease being surprised when the loudest moral crusader in the room turns out to harbor the darkest secrets, because you understand that extreme public virtue performances often compensate for private moral deficiencies. Most profoundly, you liberate yourself from the exhausting belief that if you are just good enough, just honest enough, just pure enough in your intentions, the world will somehow recognize and reward you accordingly. That belief is the lie that keeps you powerless. The second layer of deception that Machiavelli strips away is perhaps even more treacherous than the first. The fantasy that human beings are fundamentally oriented toward cooperation, mutual benefit, and reciprocal goodwill. Society invests enormous energy in maintaining this comforting fiction, teaching children that people are essentially good, that communities naturally support their members, and that treating others well virtually guarantees being treated well in return. This narrative serves important social functions, encouraging pro-social behavior and creating baseline trust that enables commerce and community. But Machiavelli understood that mistaking this useful fiction for literal truth creates a vulnerability that others will inevitably exploit. Human nature, as Machiavelli observed it through decades of political experience, is neither purely good nor purely evil, but fundamentally self-interested and responsive to incentives. People will behave generously when generosity costs them little and brings social approval. But that same person will abandon you without hesitation when helping you conflicts with their survival or advancement. This is not because humans are monsters, but because we are animals shaped by evolution to prioritize our own welfare and that of our immediate circle above abstract principles. The person who fails to grasp this reality approaches relationships and negotiations with expectations that others will reciprocate fairness simply because fairness is right. And they inevitably suffer devastating betrayals that could have been anticipated and avoided. The dangerous fantasy manifests most destructively in how people extend trust indiscriminately, assuming that because they personally would not betray a confidence or exploit a vulnerability, others must share these same restraints. Machiavelli saw countless examples of leaders destroyed not by open enemies, but by those they trusted most, advisors and allies who shifted allegiance the moment a better opportunity presented itself. The pattern repeats endlessly because the victim clings to the belief that loyalty should be reciprocated with loyalty, that past kindnesses create genuine obligations, that shared history binds people together across conflicts of interest. None of this is reliably true, and the person who bases their strategy on these assumptions will eventually encounter someone willing to exploit their naive goodwill. What makes this fantasy particularly insidious is that it contains just enough truth to remain plausible while being false enough to prove catastrophic. Yes, some people will honor their commitments even when doing so costs them significantly. Yes, certain relationships do transcend mere transactional benefit and create genuine bonds of loyalty. But these exceptions are far rarer than the fantasy suggests, and treating them as the rule rather than the exception is how trusting people end up repeatedly betrayed, exploited, and wondering why the world seems so much crueler than they were taught it should be. Machiavelli's realism does not deny that goodness exists, but it insists that you cannot build a reliable strategy around hoping for it. The alternative to this dangerous fantasy is not misanthropic paranoia, but clear-eyed assessment of human motivation. When you understand that people act primarily from self-interest, you stop taking betrayals personally and start recognizing them as predictable responses to changed circumstances. You structure agreements to align interests rather than relying on appeals to fairness or loyalty. You observe what people do rather than what they say, understanding that stated intentions mean far less than revealed preferences demonstrated through behavior. Most importantly, you reserve your deepest trust for those who have proven worthy of it through consistent action over time, while maintaining appropriate boundaries with everyone else, regardless of how pleasant or virtuous they appear. This shift in perspective actually makes you more effective at building genuine relationships, not less. When you stop expecting universal goodwill, you can appreciate the real thing when you find it without being devastated by its absence. You become someone who can cooperate productively with people you do not necessarily trust deeply, creating mutually beneficial arrangements without the need for false intimacy. You develop the discernment to distinguish between someone who is genuinely aligned with your interests and someone who performs alignment while waiting for the right moment to pursue their divergent goals. This is not cynicism but wisdom, the kind of practical knowledge that allows you to engage with the world without being consumed by it. Machiavelli's rejection of the universal goodwill fantasy liberates you from the exhausting effort of trying to make everyone like you, trust you, and support you unconditionally. You recognize that different people will respond to you based on what you represent to them in terms of benefit or threat, and you become skilled at managing these perceptions strategically. Some relationships will be transactional, some will be strategic, and a precious few will transcend calculation to become something deeper. But you will no longer confuse these categories or expect the wrong things from the wrong people. This clarity is what makes you untouchable, because you can no longer be manipulated through appeals to fairness, reciprocity, or moral obligation disconnected from genuine mutual interest. Perhaps no lie proves more paralyzing than the belief that if you simply follow all the rules, meet all the expectations, and perform your designated role with sufficient excellence, you will achieve permanent security and protection from arbitrary harm. This conviction drives people to sacrifice their health, their relationships, and their authentic desires in pursuit of positions and credentials they believe will finally make them safe. Machiavelli understood that this security is always provisional, always contingent, and always subject to revocation the moment circumstances shift or more useful servants appear. The person who builds their entire identity around being indispensable to an organization or system discovers eventually that no one is truly indispensable, and their years of loyalty mean nothing when the calculation of their value changes. The illusion operates through a simple mechanism. You observe that those who comply tend to receive rewards while those who rebel face punishment. And you conclude that perfect compliance will guarantee perfect security. What you fail to observe, because it happens slowly and behind closed doors, is how those who rose to power did so not through compliance, but through strategic positioning, calculated risk-taking, and willingness to break rules when the potential reward justified the risk. They encourage you to believe in the meritocracy, in the fairness of systems, in the reliability of doing good work and being recognized for it, because your belief in these things makes you predictable, manageable, and unlikely to threaten their position. Machiavelli saw this dynamic with perfect clarity in the courts and governments he studied. The faithful servant who devoted decades to supporting a prince could be dismissed overnight if a new advisor promised better results or if political circumstances made the old servant's loyalty suspect. The merchant who played by every regulation could be destroyed by a competitor willing to bribe the right officials. The honest administrator could be removed to make room for someone's nephew regardless of merit. These patterns repeat endlessly because power operates by its own logic, a logic that includes fairness and merit only when doing so serves the interests of those who hold power and abandons these principles without hesitation when they become inconvenient. When you internalize this reality, you stop investing your sense of security in external validation and institutional approval. You recognize that jobs, positions, and reputations are all contingent, all subject to forces beyond your control, and that building your identity around any of them creates a vulnerability that others can exploit. This does not mean you should perform poorly or abandon all ambition, but it means your security must come from your capabilities, your resources, and your network of genuine relationships rather than from your title or your role in someone else's organization. The person who understands this builds multiple sources of value, maintains options, and never becomes so dependent on any single institution that its withdrawal of favor proves catastrophic. The most profound aspect of this illusion is how it transforms you into an accomplice in your own exploitation. Because you believe that exceptional performance will eventually be rewarded with security, you work harder than is rational. Accept conditions you should reject and tolerate treatment you should resist, all while telling yourself that this sacrifice is temporary and necessary. Meanwhile, those who benefit from your labor understand perfectly well that your security will never come, that there will always be another hoop to jump through, another metric to meet, another sacrifice required. They may even believe their own rhetoric about meritocracy and fairness, which makes them even more effective at perpetuating the system. But the outcome remains the same. Machiavelli's alternative to this illusion is not nihilism or resignation, but strategic self-interest properly understood. You perform your role effectively, not because you believe the system will reward you fairly, but because doing so maintains your reputation and creates opportunities. You remain alert for signs that your position is becoming precarious and prepare alternatives before crisis forces desperate action. You accumulate resources, skills, and connections that exist independently of your current situation, so that when circumstances change, and they always change, you possess the flexibility to adapt rather than the vulnerability of someone whose entire identity and security depended on conditions that no longer exist. This approach to security makes you genuinely untouchable in ways that compliance never could. When you derive your safety from your capabilities rather than from someone else's approval, you can afford to take positions, make decisions, and pursue goals that serve your authentic interests rather than performing constant deference to appease those temporarily empowered to judge you. You become someone who engages with institutions strategically rather than devotionally, extracting value from them while they extract value from you, with no illusions about permanence or loyalty on either side. This is not a recipe for loneliness, but for freedom. The freedom to build a life structured around your actual values, rather than around the demands of systems designed to consume your energy while promising rewards they never reliably deliver. Among the most counterintuitive of Machiavelli's insights is his teaching on honesty and deception, which reveals how those who proclaim absolute commitment to truth-telling in all circumstances actually make themselves easier to manipulate than those who understand honesty as a tool to be deployed strategically. The naive truth-teller believes that radical transparency will earn them trust and respect, that laying bare their thoughts, feelings, and vulnerabilities demonstrates admirable authenticity. What Machiavelli recognized is that in a world where information is power, the person who shares everything indiscriminately arms their competitors and potential adversaries with knowledge that can be weaponized against them at the opportune moment. Selective honesty begins with the recognition that not all people deserve access to your complete truth, that different relationships and contexts call for different levels of disclosure, and that protecting certain information is not dishonesty, but appropriate boundaries. When you share your deepest insecurities with colleagues competing for the same promotion, you provide them with ammunition. When you reveal your negotiation limits before securing an agreement, you ensure you will never get better terms than those limits. When you broadcast your plans before executing them, you give others the opportunity to obstruct or co-opt your efforts. The person who understands this does not become a compulsive liar, but rather a strategic communicator who shares truth where it serves connection and legitimate purposes while protecting sensitive information from those who might misuse it. Machiavelli observed that the most successful political actors were those who could be counted on to keep their word on important matters while reserving the right to be strategically vague or even misleading on points where complete honesty would undermine their position. This reputation for reliability on significant commitments paradoxically made their occasional deceptions more effective, because people assumed they were being dealt with honestly even when careful attention would have revealed selective disclosure. The person who lies constantly quickly loses all credibility and effectiveness. But the person who maintains a general reputation for honesty while deploying deception rarely and strategically achieves outcomes impossible through either pure honesty or pure deception alone. The deeper wisdom here involves understanding that truth and honesty are not the same thing, and that sometimes sharing certain truths causes more harm than good without serving any legitimate purpose. The brutal truth about someone's appearance, abilities, or prospects may be factually accurate, but socially and ethically unnecessary to voice. The complete history of your past mistakes may be true, but irrelevant to current relationships and needlessly damaging to share. Machiavelli would argue that withholding such truths is not dishonesty, but wisdom. The recognition that not every accurate statement needs to be spoken, and that sometimes protecting others or yourself from unnecessary harm takes precedence over performing transparency for its own sake. This principle extends to how you manage your reputation and public image, where selective disclosure becomes essential to maintaining any degree of privacy or personal sovereignty. The person who shares every thought on social media, who posts about every conflict and disappointment, who broadcasts their location and activities constantly, creates a detailed map of their vulnerabilities that anyone can study and exploit. Meanwhile, the person who maintains some mystery, who shares victories while keeping struggles private until resolved, who reveals enough to seem authentic while protecting their deepest uncertainties and fears, preserves power and flexibility. Machiavelli understood that a certain reserve, a strategic withholding of complete transparency, actually makes you more trustworthy because it signals that you understand boundaries and can be relied upon not to overshare or betray confidences. The practice of selective honesty requires developing sophisticated judgment about what to share with whom and when, a skill that improves with experience and attention. You learn to observe how others use information you provide, whether they respect your confidences or spread them for social currency, whether they respond to vulnerability with support or exploitation. You adjust your disclosure accordingly, becoming more open with those who prove trustworthy while maintaining appropriate distance from those who demonstrate they cannot be trusted with sensitive information. This is not manipulation, but intelligent relationship management, the kind of discernment that protects you without isolating you. Ultimately, Machiavelli's teaching on honesty liberates you from the exhausting and ultimately self-defeating project of performing radical transparency. You recognize that you do not owe everyone access to your complete truth, that some things are legitimately private, and that protecting your own interests sometimes requires saying less than everything you know or feel. This does not make you dishonest. It makes you strategic, thoughtful, and appropriately defended against a world where not everyone wishes you well, and where information you share in good faith can be used against you by those with different agendas. The untouchable person knows what to reveal and what to protect, and never confuses indiscriminate disclosure with authentic integrity. One of Machiavelli's most practical pieces of advice involves the art of appearing conventional, traditional, and respectful of established norms, even while pursuing goals that may challenge or subvert those very norms. He observed that revolutionaries who loudly proclaimed their intention to overturn the existing order inevitably provoked unified resistance from all those benefiting from current arrangements, while those who pursued radical change while maintaining the appearance of respectful reform often succeeded in transforming systems before opposition could effectively organize. The lesson extends far beyond politics to every domain where you must operate within systems, while potentially working to advance your own interests in ways that conflict with those systems' stated purposes. The person who openly defies conventions, who broadcasts their contempt for traditional expectations, who signals at every opportunity how different and superior they are to mainstream society, pays an enormous price for this performance of rebellion. They earn the immediate hostility of those invested in existing structures. They mark themselves as threats to be contained or eliminated, and they sacrifice the social camouflage that would allow them to pursue their goals with less resistance. Machiavelli would recognize this as strategic incompetence, a failure to understand that the appearance of conformity costs far less than the appearance of rebellion while preserving substantially more freedom of action. Consider how effective change agents actually operate in bureaucracies, corporations, and institutions. They do not arrive announcing their intention to disrupt everything and overthrow established procedures. Instead, they demonstrate respect for existing norms. They speak the language of tradition and continuity. They frame their innovations as natural extensions of established principles rather than radical departures. By the time anyone realizes how substantially things have changed, the new approach has become the new normal, and resistance arrives too late to prevent transformation. This is the genius of appearing conventional while being strategic, of maintaining surface conformity while pursuing substantive goals that may diverge significantly from what superficial observers would expect. The wisdom applies equally to personal presentation and social navigation. The person who dresses, speaks, and behaves in ways that signal respect for community standards receives less scrutiny and faces fewer obstacles than the person who advertises their non-conformity through appearance and manner. This does not mean you must become someone you are not or abandon your authentic values, but it means recognizing that unnecessary provocations serve no strategic purpose, and that you can pursue quite unconventional goals far more effectively when you do not simultaneously challenge every superficial expectation about how someone like you should present themselves. Machiavelli understood that most people do not think deeply about substantive matters and instead rely heavily on superficial signals to determine who represents a threat and who represents safety. By controlling these signals, by appearing to embrace conventional wisdom while privately maintaining your own counsel, you gain enormous freedom to operate according to your actual judgment, rather than constantly defending yourself against those triggered by your apparent deviation from norms. The untouchable person grasps this distinction between appearance and reality, between what you signal publicly and what you actually believe or pursue privately. This principle becomes particularly powerful when you recognize that many conventional expectations are purely performative and that meeting them costs you almost nothing while buying substantial goodwill and reduced friction. Speaking respectfully to those in authority, even when you privately question their competence, participating in organizational rituals, even when you find them pointless, acknowledging traditional hierarchies, even when you believe merit should matter more than tenure. These small accommodations to conventional expectations create social capital you can spend when pursuing goals that actually matter to you. The person who wastes their rebellion on trivial matters has no credibility left when they need to challenge something significant. The deeper insight involves recognizing that appearing conventional actually protects your authentic self from unnecessary interference and judgment. When you signal through dress, speech, and behavior that you are a recognizable type that fits within expected categories, people stop looking more carefully and allow you substantial privacy to think, believe, and plan according to your own lights. Conversely, when you insist on broadcasting your uniqueness and defiance of conventions, you invite constant scrutiny and intervention as people feel compelled to assess whether you represent a threat or disruption they need to manage. Machiavelli would argue that true freedom requires the wisdom to appear conventional enough that others leave you alone to pursue what actually matters to you. The practice of strategic conventionality transforms how you engage with institutions, communities, and social expectations. You stop viewing conformity as surrender and start recognizing it as camouflage, as the price of admission to spaces where you can accomplish goals that matter to you. You develop skill at the necessary performances, speaking the expected phrases, honoring the required rituals, displaying appropriate deference to established hierarchies while maintaining your private judgment about which of these things possess genuine value versus which exist purely as social coordination mechanisms. This sophistication is what separates the genuinely powerful from the perpetually frustrated rebel who never understands why their obvious correctness fails to persuade those around them to embrace necessary change. Machiavelli's most famous principle concerns whether it is better to be loved or feared, concluding that while being both is ideal, if you must choose, fear proves more reliable for maintaining authority and influence. This insight scandalizes those committed to the fantasy that genuine affection and goodwill should be sufficient to create stable relationships and cooperative arrangements. But Machiavelli observed countless examples where love without fear led to betrayal the moment circumstances made betrayal advantageous, while fear without love maintained order even when affection had long since disappeared. The untouchable person understands how both dynamics operate and uses this knowledge to build relationships structured for durability rather than mere sentimentality. The limitation of love as a basis for loyalty is that it depends on the other person's feelings, which you cannot directly control, and which shift based on circumstances, moods, and competing attachments. Someone who loves you today may love someone else more tomorrow, or may discover that their love conflicts with their self-interest, and choose accordingly. Love creates genuine bonds, but those bonds prove surprisingly fragile when tested by serious conflicts of interest, or when someone perceives that betraying you offers significant advantages with minimal consequences. Machiavelli did not dismiss love, but rather recognized its limitations as a foundation for relationships where you need reliability under pressure. Fear, properly understood, does not mean terrorizing people or inspiring hatred, which Machiavelli explicitly warned against as counterproductive. Rather, it means ensuring that those you deal with understand that betraying you or failing to meet their commitments will result in predictable, meaningful consequences. The employee who fears losing a valuable job maintains higher standards than one who assumes their position is secure. regardless of performance. The partner who understands that egregious betrayal will end the relationship exercises restraint that mere affection might not provide during moments of temptation. The person who knows you will defend your boundaries and interests with appropriate force, thinks twice before attempting to exploit your goodwill. The combination of fear and love creates the most durable relationships because each element compensates for the other's weaknesses. Love provides the positive motivation to cooperate, to extend effort beyond mere obligation, to remain loyal during difficulties. Fear provides the negative boundary that prevents betrayal, exploitation, and the taking of excessive advantage during vulnerable moments. The leader, partner, or friend who inspires both becomes someone others genuinely want to support, while simultaneously understanding that exploitation or betrayal will not be tolerated or ignored. This combination is what Machiavelli recognized as the foundation of stable, productive relationships that survive the tests of time and conflicting interests. The practical application of this principle requires developing the capacity to inspire genuine affection through generosity, recognition, and support, while simultaneously maintaining clear boundaries and demonstrating willingness to enforce consequences when those boundaries are violated. The person who gives endlessly without ever pushing back trains others to take advantage of them. The person who threatens constantly without ever showing warmth or appreciation inspires resentment and minimal compliance rather than genuine cooperation. The sophisticated approach involves calibrating your responses to match the situation, showing appreciation for good faith cooperation while responding decisively to betrayal or exploitation. Machiavelli's insight about fear and love also illuminates why nice people so often finish last, while appearing to puzzle over this outcome. They rely exclusively on the love component, believing that kindness, generosity, and accommodation should be sufficient to inspire reciprocal treatment. When they inevitably encounter someone willing to exploit their goodwill, they respond with more kindness rather than consequences, training the exploiter to continue their behavior. The cycle repeats until the nice person either becomes bitter and cynical or begins to understand that kindness without boundaries is not virtue but dysfunction, and that inspiring appropriate fear of consequences is not cruelty but necessary self-protection. The untouchable person masters both dynamics, knowing when to extend warmth and when to demonstrate steel, when to forgive and when to cut ties, when to be generous and when to be exacting. They create relationships where others want to maintain connection because of genuine affection, while simultaneously understanding that severe violations of trust will result in definitive consequences. This balance is what makes them genuinely untouchable. People hesitate to betray them, not only because they might feel guilty, but because they know the costs of betrayal will exceed any benefits, while simultaneously they desire to maintain the relationship because of its positive qualities. This is power properly understood, the ability to shape others' behavior not through manipulation or coercion alone, but through a sophisticated understanding of human motivation and the intelligent deployment of both carrots and sticks. When you finally integrate all these layers of Machiavellian wisdom, when you truly understand that virtue is performed more than practiced, that goodwill is conditional rather than universal, that security comes from capability rather than compliance, that honesty must be selective, that appearing conventional provides cover for substantive independence, and that relationships require both affection and consequences, something remarkable happens. The invisible bonds that once constrained your choices and limited your freedom simply dissolve, not because the world has changed, but because you now see clearly how it actually operates rather than how you were taught it should operate. This clarity is what makes you untouchable, because the manipulation techniques that work on those who believe the fundamental lie no longer function on someone who sees through the performance to the reality beneath. The freedom that comes from this understanding is not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences, which is a childish fantasy. Rather, it is the freedom to make clear-eyed choices based on accurate assessment of costs and benefits rather than on naive hopes about how people should behave. You can extend trust where evidence supports it, while maintaining appropriate caution with those who have not yet earned that trust. You can cooperate productively with people you do not necessarily like or trust deeply, structuring arrangements around aligned interests rather than requiring emotional connection. You can navigate institutions strategically, extracting value while protecting yourself from their inevitable tendency to consume members who lack the sophistication to maintain boundaries. This perspective transforms how you experience betrayal, disappointment, and conflict, because you stop taking these things personally and start recognizing them as predictable responses to changed circumstances and conflicting interests. When someone you trusted proves unreliable, you do not collapse into existential despair about human nature, but simply adjust your assessment of that particular person and modify your behavior accordingly. When an institution that once valued you decides you are expendable, you activate prepared alternatives rather than experiencing identity crisis. When someone attempts to manipulate you through appeals to fairness or loyalty, divorced from genuine mutual interest, you recognize the technique and respond according to what actually serves your legitimate goals, rather than what you have been conditioned to believe you owe. The untouchable person that emerges from this transformation does not become cruel, cynical, or isolated, which are the fears that keep most people clinging to comforting illusions despite mounting evidence of their falsity. Instead, they become more genuinely effective at creating positive outcomes, precisely because they work with human nature as it exists, rather than constantly frustrated by people failing to match idealized expectations. They build better relationships because they enter them with realistic understanding of what different types of relationships can and cannot provide. They achieve more ambitious goals because they understand the actual dynamics of power and influence, rather than assuming merit and good intentions should be sufficient. Perhaps most importantly, the person who sees through the lie stops wasting enormous energy on the exhausting performance of virtue, divorced from strategic purpose. They can be genuinely kind when kindness serves connection and cooperation, genuinely honest when honesty builds trust without creating vulnerability, genuinely generous when generosity creates reciprocal value or simply brings them joy. But they no longer engage in these behaviors compulsively or indiscriminately, no longer sacrifice their interests to appease those who will exploit rather than reciprocate, no longer confuse performing goodness with being good. This liberation from compulsive virtue signaling is what allows them to be more authentically ethical according to their actual values, rather than constantly performing for external validation. The wisdom Machiavelli offers is not comfortable, and embracing it requires abandoning beliefs that provide psychological comfort even as they create practical vulnerability. But for those willing to endure the temporary discomfort of disillusionment, the reward is a freedom so complete that external circumstances lose their power to destroy your equilibrium. You become someone who can engage fully with the world without being consumed by it, who can participate in systems and relationships without becoming dependent on them, who can pursue goals and values without requiring universal approval or permission. This is what it means to be truly untouchable. Not that nothing can harm you, but that you cannot be controlled through the manipulation of comforting illusions you have finally learned to see through and release. Machiavelli's dark truth, properly understood, is ultimately a liberating truth. It reveals that the world operates by comprehensible principles rather than arbitrary cruelty, that human behavior follows predictable patterns once you understand motivation and incentives, and that power is not some mysterious force reserved for the especially virtuous or especially corrupt, but rather a skill set anyone can develop through study, practice, and willingness to see clearly. The lie that keeps most people powerless is the lie that power itself is somehow illegitimate or corrupting, that pursuing your interests makes you selfish, that protecting yourself proves you are untrustworthy. Once you recognize these beliefs as tools used to keep you compliant rather than truths about how the world works, you can finally begin building a life structured around your actual values and genuine capabilities, rather than around fear of disappointing those who benefit from your continued compliance and naivety. The journey through Machiavelli's dark truth leads not to darkness, but to a clarity so bright that most people initially recoil from its intensity, preferring the comfortable shadows of illusion to the demanding light of reality. But you have stayed with this exploration through all its uncomfortable revelations, which suggests you possess something rare and valuable, the courage to see what is, rather than retreating into what should be. This capacity for clear sight in a world that profits from your blindness is what separates those who drift through life, shaped by forces they do not understand, from those who navigate deliberately according to their own compass. Every system that depends on your compliance, every person who benefits from your naivety, every institution that requires your unquestioning service has invested heavily in maintaining the lie that virtue alone will protect and reward you. Your willingness to question this foundational deception marks the beginning of genuine sovereignty. What Machiavelli understood, and what you now understand if you have truly absorbed these principles, is that the world does not owe you safety, recognition, or justice simply because you deserve them. These things must be secured through clear-eyed strategy, intelligent action, and sophisticated understanding of how power actually circulates rather than how we imagine it should circulate. The person who grasps this truth stops waiting for the universe to notice their goodness and starts deliberately constructing conditions that serve their legitimate interests and authentic values. They develop the discernment to recognize when someone's proclaimed virtue conceals strategic self-interest, the sophistication to perform conventional expectations while maintaining private independence, and the balance to inspire both affection and appropriate caution in those they engage with. This combination of capacities is what makes someone genuinely untouchable, not because nothing can harm them, but because the ordinary manipulations that work on those who believe the lie simply slide off someone who sees clearly. The freedom that comes from this understanding cannot be revoked because it lives in your perception rather than your circumstances. Once you truly see how virtue is performed for effect, how goodwill is conditional and strategic, how security comes from capability rather than compliance, and how relationships require both warmth and boundaries, you cannot unsee these truths. They become part of your permanent awareness, informing every interaction and decision without requiring conscious effort. You no longer wonder why kind people get exploited, or why rule followers remain powerless, or why proclaimed virtue so often conceals actual corruption, because you understand the mechanisms that produce these outcomes. And in understanding them, you gain the power to avoid being controlled by them, to navigate around them, to use your own understanding of human nature to build genuine security rather than its comforting illusion. The path forward from here is yours to walk, but you now walk it with sight that most people never develop because they lack either the courage to look honestly or the willingness to abandon comforting fictions. You can choose to apply this knowledge with wisdom and restraint, using your understanding of power dynamics to protect yourself and advance legitimate goals. Without becoming the exploiter you have learned to recognize and avoid. You can build relationships structured around realistic understanding rather than naive hope, creating bonds that survive pressure precisely because they were never based on unrealistic expectations. You can engage with institutions strategically, extracting value while maintaining the independence that comes from understanding you are never truly indispensable and should never become truly dependent. Most profoundly, you can live according to your actual values rather than performing virtue for external validation, because you no longer confuse appearing good with being effective or mistake strategic action for moral corruption. Machiavelli's gift to those brave enough to receive it is not cynicism but realism, not corruption but clarity, not isolation but sophisticated engagement with the world as it truly exists. The lie you now see through was never designed to protect you, but to control you, to keep you predictable and manageable, to prevent you from recognizing and claiming the power that understanding always provides. By choosing to see clearly despite the discomfort, you have taken the first and most important step toward genuine sovereignty over your own life. The world will continue to reward performance over substance, to confuse strategic action with virtue, to exploit those who believe that goodness alone should be sufficient. But you no longer need to be among the exploited because you understand the game being played and can choose consciously how you wish to participate in it. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not that you float above the fray, but that you move through it with eyes open, understanding intact, and freedom secured not through illusion, but through the unflinching clarity that comes from finally accepting the dark truth about how power really works. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you recognize the truth in these uncomfortable observations, if you are ready to build a life structured around reality rather than illusion, then join others on this journey by subscribing to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these truths, someone still trapped in the exhausting performance of virtue without strategy, someone ready to see clearly even when clarity demands abandoning comforting beliefs. Leave a comment sharing which of Machiavelli's insights challenged you most deeply, or how understanding these principles has already shifted your perspective. This is not just content to consume, but wisdom to integrate, not mere information, but transformation waiting to unfold for those courageous enough to embrace it. Your willingness to engage with these ideas, to question what you have been taught, and to build understanding through honest examination marks you as someone rare and valuable in a world that desperately needs more people capable of seeing through performance to reality. The path of clear sight is not the easiest path, but it is the only path to genuine freedom, and I invite you to walk it with others who have chosen courage over comfort and truth over reassuring lies.